Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee.
Good evening. Welcome to In Session. I'm your host, Dr. Farid Holakouee, and I'll be with you for the next hour here on Radio Hamra. Let's jump right into the topic for tonight. Tonight I wanted to discuss about human intelligence and looking at it from a evolutionary perspective, and looking at it from an evolutionary perspective to see is it adaptive or has it been adaptive. And now there's so many interesting things when you have this kind of conversation, because I'm going to be using human intelligence to talk about human intelligence, if it's good or bad, or has been good or bad. So there's that. There's also something to consider, the time scale. Homo sapiens maybe been around, I think, 150,000 years, which in some ways is a lot, but also in some ways is not a lot when we look at things from a large scale evolutionary perspective. And there's not going to be some definitive answer, because I don't have one, that it's been adaptive or hasn't been. Really just bringing up some themes that point out the complexity of something like this, or these kinds of thoughts. And to me, it's just an interesting topic or thing to think about. So, when you think of anything from an evolutionary perspective, it's anything, if we want to think of it as advantageous, is that if it allows a organism or species to survive, of course, but also, very importantly, to reproduce. So, if you can live, 500 years but not reproduce, that species will go extinct if it, somehow became, was able to come about. So both of those things are necessary. Really, the reproduction is the only thing that's necessary, but essentially to be able to reproduce, you have to survive, at least survive long enough to reproduce, and then depending on, different factors on your species to help, your young grow. Some types of animals, they don't do anything at all. The babies are on their own. Some species like our own, and most mammals, but especially ours, the babies are dependent for many years to survive and can't survive on their own. They're not independent for a while. So it's about that, being able to survive and then reproduce. And so if we look at human intelligence, of course, there are so many ways that it has allowed for us to survive and adapt to so many different environments and conditions, and overcome them, or at least be able to withstand them and survive them. So we can see so many ways that, of course, human intelligence has been so helpful in our survival. It's almost might go without saying, but I'm going to say it and talk about it a little bit. I think anyone would just think that's the default answer. And that's what I'm trying to do today, is give some bit of a challenge, or at least present some aspects of the other side, looking at maybe it's too soon to say, or maybe it's a little bit more complex, or at least some aspects of human intelligence that don't contribute to our survival or have some negative impacts. And I think itself, it's an important philosophical type of discussion or thought, because sometimes we can just think, well, strength is strength. And so if you're getting stronger, that's always a good thing. How could strength be a bad thing? But these things aren't so dichotomous or so black and white, because even let's just look at physical strength. Of course, if an animal got stronger and stronger, that's going to be good. That's going to help it survive. But as it gets stronger, that means also it gets bigger. That means, one, it has to be able to have enough calories to take care of that frame. But then also, it can get to a certain size where it becomes unhealthy, and that literally can collapse on its own weight, or, can't support itself. And we do see there's these limits of animals, of how big they can become, because of these types of things of, well, the bigger you become, now your bones and muscles have to be able to support that body. So there are going to be certain types of limits that can come about. So just getting bigger and bigger and bigger isn't always good, or it has limits, or it has some complexities that come with it. And that's something to consider. So same thing with intelligence. The simple answer would be like, well, the more intelligent you get, the better your chance of survival, or the more it's going to contribute to your survival. It has to be a good thing. How could it be a bad thing? But with two things actually there. One is same thing can apply, which I'll talk about some of these ways that getting more intelligence or aspects of our intelligence may not be so good, or could have some negative aspects to it. The other thing is, of course, even when we talk about intelligence, as I was saying, I'm using human intelligence to talk about human intelligence, and so that's going to be inherently biased. And so the ways that we even think of what is intelligence versus what is not intelligence is heavily skewed towards thinking that the things we do and the things that we do well are the things that account for intelligence. And we can talk about intelligence in a lot of ways, but one way of kind of defining it or trying to describe it is anything that contributes to flexibly being able to adapt to your environment or things around you. And so there are a lot of things that, of course, humans have done and can do that contributes to us being able to flexibly interact with our environment and to survive because of that. But there's so much that we can't do that other organisms can do that we might discount or not think is as important. I remember when I read the book, The Light Eaters, which was about plants, and even just saying plants are intelligent for some people has this kind of weird, phrasing that it's like, how could that even be? What are you even talking about to say that plants are intelligent? And so do they do things the ways that humans do? No, but can they communicate? Can they take in information from their surroundings? Can they respond to things in their surroundings to benefit themselves and even benefit their kin, the people, the organisms that are related to them? Yes, we see all of that related to the kin. So if we talk about evolution, we can, of course, talk about survival of yourself and passing on your own genes. But what we also see is that there's kin selection, that if you help your family members survive because they carry your genes, then your genes, or at least a portion of your genes, still get passed down. So this could explain why people will be willing to do things. This is from an evolutionary perspective. We would hope people just help people to help people. But from an evolutionary perspective, it can be beneficial even to potentially sacrifice yourself, let's say for 3 of your siblings, or even 2 of your siblings would be equivalent to that. So what we see in plants, something that I didn't know about until I read this book, is that plants will compete for resources, including compete for sunlight. And what they found is when there were species of the same species next to each other, they would compete for sunlight. But if they were related to the ones that were next to each other, they wouldn't compete in the same way. They would try to share it more, which is really fascinating. And it shows that there's some ways that the plants are picking up on who is around them and adjusting their behavior accordingly, which is really fascinating. So it's hard for us to think of this as plants as intelligent, but again, they are doing things that adapt to their environment, and probably they do things we don't know. Lots of beings might do things we don't know about. We don't have ways of detecting it, possibly. But of course, that is a type of intelligence. So we are definitely biased to think that we have the best type of intelligence, human exceptionalism. And I think, yes, there is a lot of evidence, again, coming from my human brain trying to figure this out, that would point to that I could understand this idea that we are an intelligent, or maybe the most intelligent being, or we can say that. But there's also complexities to it too. For example, sensory things that we can't do, like a bee can see infrared, or different types of rays on the or spectrums of light, and the light spectrum that we can't see. And so that's a type of intelligence, or at least perceptive intelligence. Now, we had the intelligence to be able to figure that out, that they can even see it or still detect it. I think that's obviously accounting for something, but just something to also keep in mind that we think of ourselves as intelligent, or even we think of ourselves as the only intelligent being. Sometimes when people talk about aliens, extraterrestrials, beings from other planets, will say, is there intelligent life on other planets? And so we're saying something there, that maybe we know there's other life on other planets. It's going to exist, even let's say, unicellular types of organisms. But this idea of intelligence means something to us. I think usually for most people, it brings up some idea of consciousness, that they are able to kind of be conscious in the ways that we are conscious. And of course, probably do things that we do, have tools and other things, but some animals may do that as well. I think it would be interesting once, or if we ever do encounter whatever this we would consider intelligent life on other planets, what it would look like. And I think one thing I would make a note of, or comes to my mind, is that there's just no way for us to really know what that can even look like. We're so restricted and restrained by what we see on our planet and with humans, that there's probably types of intelligence that we can't even recognize, couldn't predict, can't even see, that might exist, that another type of being from another planet might have, whether we ever encounter that or not is a separate question. So, we could see that this conversation itself of what human intelligence is, comparing it to other even beings on this planet, it's complicated, and we have to be, I think, aware of the, of course, biases that we can't completely overcome because we're looking at it from our own lens, but also one of the very clear biases of human exceptionalism and thinking that our intelligence must be the best type of intelligence. And so before the break here, just a few more minutes, I'll even just add, I'm going to get to more serious ones after the break. But this is something I talked about recently, that just showing you the complexity of things, that we have the ability to think about and predict the future, which is really helpful when it comes to survival in a lot of ways, to prepare for the future, anticipate ways that things can go wrong. It's even, when we think about human intelligence, it's also included language and communication, which has been so critical for us to be able to, work together, coordinate together. Most species, you can see small groups working together if they're related. Even with bees, yes, you can see certain things, but we have maybe millions of humans can work together, or billions of humans can work together. So there are these ways that our intelligence and our ability to communicate related to that intelligence has allowed for us to do things that are really incredible, to collaborate in that way. But because of our ability to predict things, one can say that also leads to things like anxiety, or a lot of the mental health things that we struggle with, or even the sense that we can make meaning or make sense of things. Meaning allows for us to even collaborate better, because we can look at something that's even more important than ourselves or bigger than ourselves, and because of that come together to work together in ways that is very important. But because of that, even like something like meaning, we can also have this sense of meaninglessness in life, that we feel like our life is meaningless. And even for some people, we unfortunately have the consequence or the result that they might take their own life because of mental anguish, because of a lack of meaning or lack of that type of feeling that means something. So it's tragic when it does happen. And in some ways it might be small in scale, but just I want to give a sense of understanding what I'm talking about here with this conversation, that when we look at different aspects of any kind of feature, but even some like human intelligence, it's easy to just think it's all good, and the more intelligent is, the better. But we can see that it's actually not so black and white, and there are some complexities. Even when we look at people who are more intelligent, we do see often that people who are super intelligent tend to have a hard time functioning in some ways. Or, there is kind of this thought of genius and madness, or it's a blurry line or a thin line that separates genius and madness. And so we can see that, even the ways that we think of human intelligence within humans and comparing human to human, we can see that sometimes being even more intelligent, there are limits to where it might be helpful and at what point it might actually be hurtful, or at least much more of a mixed bag, not just all good. So just some basic thoughts there. But after the break, I'm going to talk a bit more about how when we think of human intelligence, and of course, up to now, it might seem like for sure it's contributed to our well-being and our survival, and it's been evolutionarily advantageous or adaptive. We can see some kinks in the armor of that type of thinking that make it feel less black and white or less clear. So let's go to a commercial break. After, we'll talk more about human intelligence. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Continuing the discussion on human intelligence and if it's been evolutionarily advantageous. I made the description about physical strength and how that takes calories to maintain. And the same is actually true about brains. As far as organs go, it's way more energy consuming than other organs we have in our body. So a bigger brain necessitates being able to acquire more calories, and it's an interesting type of trade-off. And so you can see the more intelligent you are, maybe you can acquire more calories by being able to respond to your environment in a certain way, but there's going to be limits to that as well. And before the break, I shared just one example of how human intelligence, part of it allows for us to predict or anticipate future or different futures, and then because of that make adaptations, do things to adjust to that can definitely help us survive, but also that can lead to mental anguish that we experience, which of course can just make life less pleasant, which we know that evolution makes us survive, but it doesn't necessarily makes us happy. It doesn't mean we're going to feel content or feel good. If you are miserable, but that would make you survive better, that might actually, that would be evolutionarily advantageous. So unfortunately, that might propagate or become part of a species. So, but we can also see that it can actually lead to death because of meaninglessness of life, or feeling anxiety or anguish. You might kill yourself, or you might also kill others, which would contribute to being detrimental to the species. But we can also look at bigger ways that intelligence can lead to destruction. And as I say that word destruction, maybe already to your mind comes some things like weapons of mass destruction and different technologies that we might be able to create that might be advancements as far as, let's say, science or possibility or capability. We look at, for example, atomic bombs. It's a bomb. We had bombs before that could explode or detonate and have some kind of impact, but it was now capable of being on a whole new scale. And even since the ones that have been detonated, only two that have been detonated as in combat, we know that the atomic bombs are much stronger. So we are able to make advancements using our intelligence, which in that way are a type of progress. But we can see how there's a very good argument here. Actually, some of the other arguments I've made I can see are not as maybe strong, or they might point to just a small effect. But we can see how we would actually say that even the capability, if you can have a species that can make an atomic bomb or not make an atomic bomb, it probably would be better than they had less intelligence or right below that amount of intelligence to create an atomic bomb. Now, I'm far from not even expert, but even knowledgeable in this field, because I know there's nuclear energy and different even medical uses for things related to nuclear types of things. And, it could be used as actual energy that can be helpful, I'm sure, in some ways. So there's also, even with that, it's not just black or white to say it's just the atomic bomb. That science has led to innovations that probably have advanced other things as well. But still, we can see that this advancement of being able to develop this, which took a certain level of intelligence collectively to create an atomic bomb, when it comes from an evolutionary standpoint of survival, to then be able to reproduce, we would probably say that's a negative thing. It hasn't been helpful. at least up until this point. It might contribute to other types of sciences that make us advance even further in some ways. But I would say that a very strong argument could be made that that's actually been detrimental. We have been on the brink, or the possibility of complete destruction of the earth, or of all people on the earth. The weapons that the countries currently have can blow the planet up, or kill all the people on the planet many times over, and that could happen. And we've been close to that. You talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis and just the Cold War. There's always been this prospect or possibility that these weapons that were made from human intelligence could wipe out human intelligence and human existence completely. And so we can see that it's not so black and white to just say the more intelligent you are, the better it is for your survival. And so this creates these, for me, interesting types of paradigms or ways of thinking about things. As I was saying, if you had an intelligent being that could create, in a way it feels like they would be dumb or dumber than us, but wouldn't be able to create some of the destructive things we have made. And look, you can't just say make productive things and not destructive ones, and often things that are destructive are also productive, and vice versa, like with the nuclear, that there are aspects of it that might be helpful and positive, but also it has the possibility of being very, very destructive on a global scale. But if you had a species that was like humans but a little bit less intelligent, it's possible that would be better for their survival at some level. It's an interesting kind of a thing, because the more we've been able to be interconnected, the more we've also been able to try to help each other, but also destroy each other. And so another argument or another thread I want to add to this conversation, and even this, it might be part of human intelligence, or we can consider it part of this, but there is something about a type of moral development or a cooperative development, or I'm not sure exactly what word to put on it, but some type of concept or construct here that comes into the picture of, okay, you can create things that might have lots of force, impact, which could be possibly good and bad, or both, or maybe sometimes one more than the other. But do you have the not human, maybe is the wrong word, but the capacity and the of morally making the right decisions with it? I don't know if emotional intelligence to me would be too simplified. I think Bertrand Russell and many others have talked about this, these topics. So I'm definitely not introducing something here new. But do you have the capacity to handle that? I think we're also seeing this with AI in two ways. One is with AI, there are concerns that because could be itself intelligent, so creating something that's intelligent on its own, it can become its own thing and literally be out of our control, because it'll control itself and might do certain things. But there also are concerns that AI can be used by bad actors to do bad things. And so for those two reasons, I'm sure others, there's even been people within the field of AI and scientists who are knowledgeable about artificial intelligence who say we should maybe pause AI development, or be very cautious of how we develop it, because it can be harmful in ways that we can't even imagine, or there can be very serious unintended consequences that might be on the horizon, and we can't anticipate them. So it might be important to be cautious. So we can see that advancement when it comes to science, even though it can seem like progress, or we use that word progress, all that progress always comes with some risks or possibilities that can be negative as well. So it's interesting to think, well, if you are more intelligent than another species, you have a better chance of surviving. But we can see that that's not totally the case, or it's not so straightforward. And so I think there is, in some ways, maybe this intelligence that I'm talking about is kind of like the brain power. But, maybe if I'm saying that intelligence includes adapting to your environment, then it should include this moral side, or this cooperative side, that you would have the kind of moral intelligence as I said, emotional intelligence is probably too simplified or too overused in other contexts. But this kind of intelligence to deal with what you have so that you don't destroy yourselves. And so maybe there have been many other intelligent beings on other planets, and we haven't seen them yet because they've destroyed themselves. There could be this type of sweet spot of how intelligent you become, how fast or how much you develop certain types of capacities of developing certain types of technologies, but how quickly you also develop the moral side of your species or your intelligence, if you want to call it that, to manage that. And so I could understand that. Even we could look at the human experiment and human beings, and we were very close and still are, could still happen. Again, we have to look at things in a larger scale rather than just, it's been 150,000 years, so this experiment is done, or it's been a good thing. But we have been many times close to ending it all. It could have happened by now, and we could still have that happen. So there is that risk that is there. So I do think it's interesting to think that maybe a less intelligent being would survive better. We could even see that there are, termites or other animals that exist on Earth that we might try to destroy them. They might even survive whatever we do because they might have more of an adaptability to survive certain things. They say cockroaches might survive nuclear war or whatever. I don't really know if that's true, but they might survive something that we can't survive, that we would create, and we might destroy ourselves. So it is this really interesting thing that we, human beings, we have been able to overcome so much of nature and different circumstances and even disease and different things that we have been able to definitely not conquer completely, but withstand and survive. But we might end up killing ourselves. I was talking about suicide in the last segment as one aspect that can be seen as a negative when it comes to survival about human intelligence. But we can even see we might do a collective type of suicide, or we might kill ourselves if we're not careful. We even see that we're doing that with the planet, that there are things that we're doing to our habitat that might make it inhabitable for us, that we might not be able to survive it at some point in the future, again, because of different types of advancements that our intelligence has allowed, but we haven't had the type of, as I said, moral intelligence, or I'm not sure exactly, I maybe have to think about these terms a little bit more, but that side of the, character sometimes comes to mind, but maybe that's too simplified too, to use that intelligence in the best way. It's kind of like if we think of the analogy of physical strength, you get so strong, but then you start just running into things or, pounding on things, and you end up hurting yourself because you have all this strength, but you don't know how to wield it. Or I could think of an analogy of a car. You have a car with this really strong engine. That's kind of that type of the intelligence of the progress. But if you don't know how to steer it well, then it's just going to, it can go very fast, but very fast probably into a wall or off a cliff, or it's not going to survive. So the strength and the speed in that sense, although we can just think of that, if you get faster and faster and faster, that's a good thing. Speed is good. But of course, if you can't handle your own speed, if that own car can't handle itself, then that more speed is going to lead to its detriment. So if it was slower, it would actually survive better. So I'm kind of making that similar analogy here. So we can kind of see this, these two types of intelligence, or two aspects of intelligence, having to develop at similar rates. That's maybe another way of putting it, that it's, if they don't develop in parallel, we can end up in trouble. You can end up with kind of giving the toddler ending up with a handgun kind of a thing, where you have too much power in the hands of someone, in this case some collective one as far as the human population, that's too much power for them to handle, and they end up destroying themselves. So we don't know what's happened on other planets. Maybe at some point, if we're able to travel to other planets, we'll see the remnants of civilizations that were intelligent and maybe way more intelligent than us. But if intelligent in certain ways of being able to progress scientifically and technologically, but without the moral side, the collaborative side, the kind of the prudence, the wisdom, you can even say, of how to handle that, they might have destroyed themselves, kind of just driving too fast. They made the car that was so fast, but they didn't quite know how to steer it, and so they collectively drove themselves off the cliff. So we can see that intelligence is this complex thing, and there can be an argument made that it's too early to decide if human intelligence has been helpful for our survival. I'll also just make another point. We do things that hurt ourselves, even like, let's say, what we put into our bodies. We can see that this might seem much smaller scale than nuclear bombs, but to me it's just another aspect of we could advance in certain ways that don't even meet our own needs in some way. So it's interesting, intelligence and some parts of our human character can get exploited at the expense of others. So we can see that clearly what we put into our bodies, although we've advanced so much, and there's lots of ways that we've made food healthier in the sense that we might not put toxins in our food, or we'll be able to kill certain things like bacteria and things that are unhelpful, and maybe cultivate and culture the ones that are helpful, but we also created things that are not good for us and then tap into some of our evolutionary needs. And this gets into a whole argument about capitalism and how it's trying to make us, it doesn't give us what we need, it tries to give us what we want, and then it tries to create a need from that want, because you can start getting addicted to something that you never needed but could desire or wanted. And now you're just addicted and feel a need to have something that is actually bad for you. But we can see there's other ways that we create things or have created things that hurt us. They're not helpful. The food that was on earth was better for us in a lot of ways than things that we have created, so it's not all good. In the last segment, what I want to do is, it's related to these themes of our intelligence and ways that it's been could be seen as evolutionarily maladaptive or hasn't been helpful, or it's too soon to say. But then also, I was talking about going to other planets, and I've thought about this theme of, interplanetary, intergalactic travel. Can it ever happen? Will it ever happen? Why have we never seen anyone else? That's kind of an argument that people have. Well, okay, we're this, one planet and one experiment of life, but if it's happened all over the galaxy and it's infinite, how have we not found, or how has there not been another life form somewhere else that has been able to travel, and then we've seen them? Now maybe we just haven't seen them and they've been here or something like that. But I'll have some thoughts on that related to this conversation, this topic of human intelligence, and if it's been helpful or not. So let's go to our last commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So I've been having a discussion on human intelligence. Has it been evolutionarily advantageous, adaptive for us human beings? And as I've said several times, the easy answer is yes, and it's not that I'm saying it's no. Just introducing some complexities that we can see that maybe it's not always a good thing. And like all things, strength or getting bigger has its limits, and it also is complex. It's not just a linear type of growth, that bigger is better in all ways. But as I said in this last segment, I wanted to share some thoughts on a relevant or related topic, because I talked about going to different planets, or why have we not seen any beings from other planets. And so it's on the same theme of our, I don't even know how to explain it when I say scientific or technological progress. But yeah, that type of intelligence or progress, but also our moral progress, or this cooperative type of progress. And the reason why cooperative comes to mind for me, and moral itself can be hard to define, but cooperative, when we think of a few things, scientific advancement even itself, the more it is cooperative, the more it is open, the better and faster things advance. And so we've seen movements towards that, of making scientists communicating with each other and publicly sharing their results and their data. Unfortunately, because of competition, one between countries, a lot of scientific advancements have originated from military motivations. So even things that we use, I think like things like the internet or lots of things that we use now as conveniences were initially developed for the military and for military advancements. And so because of that, of course, countries don't share what they're doing. So we don't know a lot of what's going on. What we see is usually years behind or in fields that are very unrelated to anything that can be used to dominate one another. Sadly, that's kind of how things still stand. So there's been a lot of things. Even when we look at the atomic bomb, there was this race of trying to build the atomic bomb because you would have this power over other countries, and we saw the effect it did have in World War II. So we do see this. Unfortunately, we have science and the scientific community is collaborative in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways it still isn't. But nonetheless, we could see how the openness and the collaboration contribute to advancement at a much faster rate than if everyone is working by themselves and not sharing things with one another. Imagine if each scientist had to learn everything from scratch. There'd be a lot less advancements. We talk about standing on the shoulder of giants. It's all these scientists in the millennia before who have made the advancements that allows us to start from, this height already rather than have to build it up every time. So, that collaboration, when we talk about advancing things in general. So actually, maybe I didn't make it clear. What I'm talking about here is creating the type of technology to be able to travel interplanetary, if that's even possible. I know there's some things intergalactic, I should say, is it even possible because of light years? And, there's so many things and I don't understand it to even say, but let's just think of whatever might be possible. So I'm trying to say, how do we get to that point? And so, of course, you need to have this technological advancement, but the collaborative side, so just having the brain power is not enough, because first you have to collaborate to advance things. That's very clear. And so if you have a civilization of beings, so again, I'm not just saying humans, intelligent life, the more they are collaborative and the less they are competitive in that way. Now, there can be healthy competition that might allow for you to advance things, but overall, the more collaborative they are, and the more not just competitive, but I'm talking about destructive competitive. So it's not like you're just trying to win the race to get a prize or to get more money. You might be trying to win the race so you can kill your enemies or kill the other side. So the more collaborative they are, the more the science will be able to progress because of that. So that's one reason why this, there's this collaborative intelligence or collaborative aspects of the development of whatever species we're talking about in this intelligent life that's so important. The other huge reason why this collaborative side is important is that what I was talking about before with things like nuclear weapons, that the scientific progress might be used to destroy each other and potentially destroy the planet, or destroy at least that intelligent life. The planet might continue. I'm reminded of George Carlin, the comedian, had a really good bit that I'm going to butcher badly, but it was basically about how, people are saying, oh, we're destroying the earth. And people who are environmentalists talk about destroying the earth. And he's like, we're not destroying the earth. He's like, we're killing the earth. We're killing us. So the earth will still be here, even if we make it that we can't live here anymore. Maybe it just shows how much we're thinking about ourselves, but the earth will be here. Now, we might obviously affect it in very serious ways, but it'll still be here. Just we won't be here anymore. And so in the same way, this intelligent life might evolve, but if they don't have this type of, collaborative side, also just the wisdom, because they might create something that kills themselves accidentally, not even trying to harm one another. But if they don't have this collaborative and this wisdom, along with the intelligence, the brain power, they might not be able to develop a technology or exist long enough to develop a technology that would allow for them to travel intergalactically. So maybe that is the challenge, that the upper limits might not just be, can you scientifically do it or can you create something? It's that, can you create something while still keeping yourself alive as a species, as a civilization? And as I mentioned, we haven't been good when we look at the human existence. Maybe we're still, of course, in our infancy. Hopefully, if we're around for a long time, we don't destroy ourselves. So maybe we will get better, but being collaborative has not always been something we've been good at, and we still see how the world is not, definitely human beings are not working together. You see a lot of these movies where the aliens show up and now all the humans are working together against the aliens. So as is often the case, sometimes an external enemy can make enemies become friends in order to make sure they all survive. But unfortunately, we don't function as a unified unit, 8 billion strong. We're not really that, because we're competing with each other, trying to destroy each other, literally try to kill each other in different ways, and not working together on top of that. So we're not even using all our brain power to its maximum, what we can create or what we would be able to develop. So there's something, when we talk about, for example, trying to do any kind of space travel, let's say you're just trying to go to the moon, or even, I think, maybe a satellite, or maybe a satellite doesn't leave our atmosphere. I'm not sure if that counts exactly, but nonetheless, or doesn't leave our orbit. But we talk about escape velocity. There's kind of a speed that a body must achieve in order to overcome the gravitational pull and the atmospheric pull and to go into outer space. There's an escape velocity. And so what I'm considering here is, rather than this type of speed escape velocity, or this the kind of movement, is a type of collaborative escape velocity, or this unifying escape velocity, that for a civilization, for a form of intelligent life to travel intergalactically, they likely will have to achieve a certain level of unifying and collaborative and wisdom, and that's a broad word or a vague word, but that type of collective escape velocity will be necessary as well. So you have to be able to achieve a speed to leave the planet, but in order to leave the planet and to travel in the ways that would be necessary, it would be necessary for that civilization, for that species, to be able to work together and not to destroy themselves in the process, or to destroy each other in the process. And when I say that simply, it almost sounds funny. Well, why would they do that? But that's exactly what we see happening on Earth, that because of the lack of that type of global unity and that type of cooperation or collaborative type of mindset or spirit, we are at the brink always of potentially destroying all of us, which is really sad to say. And I know it's easy to say and just say, oh, kumbaya, and everyone should have world peace starting tomorrow because of what I'm describing here. I know it's much more complicated than that. And even that could be its own aspects of this discussion, that the way the intelligence gets developed could impact, whether or not the species is able to work together. What does that intelligence even look like? So that is another aspect of it. But I do think it's just something interesting that it's hard to say. Has human intelligence really helped us survive? In a lot of ways, definitely, especially in the time when we survived, and there was even other human-like species other than Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and probably others. But we were the ones that survived, and that's good. It helped us win those fights and those battles to survive. But is it necessarily all good, or is it going to lead to some kind of very long existence? We don't know. There are people who think, oh, humans will exist forever, and I think that's clearly another indication of human exceptionalism. And sometimes there is a religious side to it, that, oh, God created humans and we are special in this way, and so we'll always have to exist. Somehow we'll always have to exist. And to me, that's, I was talking before about this idea of world peace starting tomorrow is very idealistic. To me, that's a very idealistic and quite frankly childish way of looking at things, that for some reason we just have to exist. I think that's just something that people like to say to cling on to as a sense of security. Even people will say that when it comes to the planet, like, oh, well, humans will always exist, so we don't have to worry about climate change or what we're doing to the planet, because no matter what, we'll find a way. There has to be a way because humans will have to exist. I think that's very simplistic and, as I said, childish in a way of just calming ourselves to not facing the realities of what we're doing and what's in our future. But as I said, to me, this is just something to consider when we look at what it would take to achieve interplanetary, intergalactic types of travel that might allow us to see other life forms, other intelligent life forms, and why we maybe have never seen one. It's possible, of course, there are some limits that might make it impossible, because you have to be able to travel that distance, but also live long enough to travel that distance. So even if you have that capability, but also, can we have the type of collaborative spirit or the moral aspect of things in place in order for that intelligence to not collapse on itself, for the advancements that are made to not lead to the destruction of those very same intelligent beings. So we get so strong that we collapse on our own weight. When it comes to human beings, we don't know yet. And actually, when it comes to human beings, also, it's not something I would say is fixed. Maybe there are some factors that make it lean one way or the other, but I think a lot of it depends on what we do. Human civilization is in some ways very, very young, especially when you think of how long we've been more of a global type of community. I think very young. And hopefully very young in the sense that it lasts a very long time. But what we do with it and what we become, there's a lot still to be written. And hopefully what we write is something much more collaborative and unified than what we've had so far. And I'm hopeful we will go in that direction. All right, that brings us to the end of tonight's show. A big thank you to Farid here in the studio. You've been listening to In Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee. Zan Zendegi Azadi.